Hi, I'm Len Epp from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Marc Bless. Based in Baden-Baden, Marc is a certified Scrum Alliance trainer and certified enterprise coach for business agility with decades of experience in multiple industries. You can follow him on Twitter at Marc Bless, that's Marc with a C, and check out his website at agilecoach.de. Along with Dennis Faulkner, Marc is co-author of the book Agile Games and Simulations, Field-Tested Games for Scrum Masters and Agile Coaches. In the book, Marc and Dennis provide readers with a comprehensive toolbox of games and simulations for anyone facilitating workshops on Agile methods. In this interview, we're going to talk about Marc's background and career, professional interests, his and Dennis's book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about their experience writing and publishing. So thank you very much, Marc, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
Thank you for inviting me to this podcast. I'm really excited, and
Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to it for a while. I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you found your way into the career that you've built for yourself.
Okay, so I was born some 50 years ago in a town called Heidelberg, which is, I think, quite known in the world out there. So, but I don't grew up in Heidelberg. We moved to another city in the very southwestern part of Germany. And there I grew up for at least 20 years. And then I went to university studying computer science in the last decade of the last millennium. And working with computers and doing mathematical things and physics and stuff like that was always of high interest. Even as a kid, I started experimenting with small boxes, with electronic sets and stuff like that, and tried to find out how everything works. And then it was quite natural, I think with the age of 10 or 11, I got my first home computer, as you can see in my background screen here, the Commodore C64. And yeah, I immediately started experimenting with it, developing in basic programming language, and playing around, playing games with the computer. And so it was really clear to me after 2 or 3 years that I would do something in the future related to computers and mathematics. And so it came after doing some 50 months of civil service. I started studying, and it was back then in the 90s, mid of the 90s. One of my specialties in university was artificial intelligence. So I had a very early connection to the actual hype of AI, which is quite amazing to see what's happening at the moment. So after university, I started as a system programmer with C++ in Linux, and we built real-time market data analytical machines, kind of stuff like that. So we collected real-time data from all the stock markets in the world and refined those data and stored everything, did great calculations with it. And we built the whole system from scratch. So there wasn't, besides of the Linux kernel, there wasn't any other third-party software. So we did everything on our own. That was a really amazing experience. And during that time, I started with the first experiments with Agile methods. Back then, it wasn't clear to me that there was something like Agile. So I did... I discovered the works of Ken Beck with all the extreme programming stuff, and I just picked some of those things and tried if it was helpful. And in the early 2000 years, I was responsible for a project back then in the company, and that was my first, let's say, fully agile kind of project, and it really was so much better than everything that we tried before. So that was for me the eye-opener that led for me to the conclusion this is the way to go. So I digged deeper and dived deeper into the Agile methods and all the tools and practices and principles below it. And it took quite some while until I changed the company where I was asked to help them. It was a medical device company, and they struggled with their with their environments and their normative regulations that they had in developing software for medical devices. And they asked me if I had any idea how to help them with Agile methods. They for themselves started with feature-driven development, which is not that well known nowadays. But back then it was a good idea, and we tried some things. Finally, we started some Scrum teams, and I wrote my first book during that time on the very special topic. It's called Scrum and the IEC 62304, which is one of the European standards for developing software for medical devices. And this was in 2013, I think, the book was published. It was my first self-published book, by the way, but at a German self-publishing service. So, and then in 2013, I started my own company, actually. So it's now kind of 11, 12 years that I'm self-employed with my own company. And I coach teams and individuals, organizations, leaders on any level, in all aspects of agility, Scrum, whatever there is, to make the organization a better one.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that really great story. There's a lot of interesting things for us to talk about there. I'd like to begin with your background there, your virtual background, I should say.
Yeah.
So when you started programming on your Commodore 64, how did you do it? Did you have magazines? Did you have books? Did you?
Yeah. So first of all, I had the C64 handbook, which was a basic introduction to the basic programming language. And I had another book with an introduction to this programming language. And I can remember we went on vacation with my parents. And back then, there were no smartphones, nothing that no mobile devices at all to bring to your vacation. So I had my book on developing in the basic programming language, and I had some sheets of paper and a pen, and that was basically it. So I developed my first programs by writing things down, like people did in the 50s and 60s. And this was really a great experience, because after 2 weeks, we went back home, and I started the machine and started to type what I thought about should be a working program. And most of the things worked quite well, with some bugs. So from an autodidactic point of view, I learned everything by my own. And there was, in Germany, back then, there was a big magazine, and I think its name was, what was its name? In German, 64er. So this is kind of the 46th, 64th.
Yeah.
And it contained lots of stuff about this machine, and additional equipment and listings that you could type into the machine and start playing around with it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. It's just so interesting. I mean, when you're of a certain vintage, you remember times when, like, the magazine would come in, say, once a month. And, right. It would be a big deal. It would be like, well, what's it good? You have no idea what's going to be in it.
Yeah.
The editors made these decisions about what they wanted to be in the magazine that month. The writers wrote it, and it sort of comes in the mail. And then like, it's just it's a real kind of moment, which is very different from the continuous, the sort of like, everything's out there at your fingertips.
Right.
Time
Yeah.
kind of way.
It always was a big surprise.
Yeah. And so then you studied computer science in university. This that brings up a question that does come up on the podcast pretty often, which is, if you were starting out now, intending to have a career, in IT, would you get a university degree?
I think yes. Yeah, I would say so. Because why? You probably want to know why I say
yeah.
yes.
Well, the just to prime the pump, as it were. I'm on Team University. Not everybody is. There's a lot of people. I mean, it can vary by their experience and their approach to things and things like that. One of the reasons that I'll advocate for it is that basically, like, for example, and this is to give a kind of practical answer. One of the tickets to the middle class, if you didn't grow up in it yourself, is going to university. And it's not just because of what you learn or the sort of degree, it's because of the people that you meet. For the rest of your life, you're going to have friends who are doctors and lawyers and engineers and what have you, because you met them and became friends when you were at university. And the real ticket there isn't just like, oh, I've got something on my back, I'll call up my doctor friend. It's that it sort of demystifies all professions.
Yeah.
You no longer think, ooh, someone in profession something must be very special. No. I remember them drunk at the party,
Yeah.
or your
you're totally
exams or what have you. So that's my kind of fun but sort of serious answer.
Yeah.
Why, if you have the opportunity, if you can afford it, if you have the time and all that, like spending 4 years of your youth in study with other young people is just an incredibly important thing to do.
Yeah.
It carries a value with it you'll have your whole life.
Yeah, that's a very great perspective. Yeah, you're totally right. To me, what made it so good was that I was not on a very theoretical university, but it was very practical. So we did, it was a mixture of getting all the basics, all the foundation, the mathematical and theoretical foundation of computer science. And on the other hand, really developing real things and working on real software and solving real problems in my university time. And I know lots of people who went to a more theoretical university or theoretical study. So they know lots of things on the theoretical level, and they can explain theories and stuff. But many of them are not really able to do real work, let's call it like that, with real results. And for me, that was a great experience to have both.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I find from the people I've talked to who sort of both computer science backgrounds or who end up being programmers or in that world, the biggest complaint, if they have complaints about their time at university, was I didn't learn anything practical.
Yeah.
And they love that. Basically everybody loves the theory, but they also and the math and that kind of stuff, but because it's interesting. But they also want to learn as it were, practical things. Like so many people, their way into it was like they got a computer and they just started playing with it. The magic and fun of making things. And to then go to university where you think, oh, this is what I'm going to do, and then you get deprived of what you loved about it in the first place. Can be very distracting. Of course, the sort of subtext for this, for anyone listening, is there are so many resources available now to people that the question of should I go to university is a much more sort of potent question now than it was 30 years ago, because you really can, you can actually just sit and watch first year MIT computer science courses yourself for free, and you can get all the exercises and you could do it. You could do that.
You can just do it. And I think nowadays, if I had to make the decision now, I think if I had a great business idea or product idea, something that I want to build, I'm not sure if I would start studying or if I would just go ahead and develop things, creating a first small system, trying things out. But yeah, I think this is because of all the experience of the last decades that I made. So without that experience, it's hard to tell.
And that's true. And just to stay back there for a couple of moments longer. So you mentioned you were working with AI back in the mid 90s. What sort of engagement did you have with AI at that time?
So in the university, we did lots of Lisp and scheme programming, so expert systems. I did some genetic algorithms. So yeah, algorithms that change over time in the way our DNA does. And we experimented with neural nets as well. So, but back then, it was 30 years ago. What's called AI back then was basically nothing more than character recognition. So you had a sheet of paper with some written stuff on it, and you scanned it, and then there was the first systems who were able to say, this is this character, and here's this, and then you had everything scanned to text, so to say. And this was the big thing back then, but nothing really more. And when I was finished with university, my idea was to find a company where I can start my job that had to do something with AI. And the AI hype cycle back then was just in the phase where it was on a full decline. So nobody wanted to do anything with AI any longer because companies experimented with it for a couple of years, and the promises were great as always, but they didn't hold true.
Yeah, was that called the AI winter? Is that
one of the AI
AI winters? Yeah. Winter is coming. Well, we're definitely not in winter now. But so you went into industry. This would have been at the sort of booming time of the internet and the World Wide Web and stuff like that. And eventually, you mentioned you had your first experience with Agile, and that was transformative. And I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit about what was different about it from what you had, what it is, and for example, someone listening who's never heard of any of this, what was the Agile software development, and how was that different from what you had been doing?
Yeah, so I think there were a couple of things we made differently. In this project that we started, it was a project where we had to develop both a new backend system, so the core of the system that you can't see as a user, which does all the calculations and all the data gathering and stuff like that. And on the other hand, we had a customer, a beta customer or a test customer for this new system. So we had everything on a web interface, which was visible and beautiful and whatnot. So we had access to real users working with the system. And the major change we did in this project was that the back-end developers and the front-end developers worked together in one big room, and they communicated all the time. And we had even the project or the product manager, the customer-facing product manager. We had this guy in the room as well, which was really, we never did that before because it was totally clear product management was on another level. The white collar workers, so to say, on the upper level of the building. And in this project, it was really great. We had a great product manager with direct contact to the customers. And we were able to talk to the customers and to the users. And therefore, we had this direct feedback from the people using the system, even for the backend developers who never had any contact with them before. So we were able to find out if the things that we built were the right things or were usable for them or useful or valuable. And this was really, groundbreaking, so to say, because in the years before, we always had those classical long-term project plans. So on 400 pages, signed by the customer and us as the developers, everything pretended to be pretty clear what we had to do. So we developed the system, and 2 years later, the customers and the users said, "Oh, all right, no, sorry, but that's not what we need right now." And this was really great to get this feedback once in a month or after a couple of weeks or something regularly. The other thing, so that were two changes. We had everybody in the team in one room communicating or being able to communicate all the time. And we had direct contact to the users using the system. And what we did was experimenting with test-driven development. So from the pure development skill level, we changed from testing at the end, when every developer says, yeah, it works on my machine, everything should be fine now, to a mode of let's think about how can we automate and increase our quality in the first place. And this was really, really cool because we created a system that had so few bugs that it was really totally easy to create a working high quality system. And I think that were the major changes compared to how we worked before.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think it's sort of like it might be hard for people to living in the age of like continuous deployment and stuff like that. And to sort of think about the idea of like a group of people working on a software product for a very long time according to a predetermined plan, and then just dumping the product on people. Yeah. That might seem very strange, but that is the way things went. And that is to some extent still the way things go, particularly in highly regulated things like medicine and when financial trading and stuff like that, like there's
people still think they have to work like that in some industries.
Yeah. And just to carry on with the story, so eventually you went independent. And what was that like? How hard was that decision to make? Did you have like tons of years of work lined up in advance, or did you kind of dive in?
I think the latter. So I just dive in. So it was it was a process over a couple of years. So I thought about in 2008. To become independent, and then this thing in the medical company started, where I made more and more agile experiences. This was also the time when I went to international conferences talking about agile topics. I wrote my first book, wrote articles, started my website, my blog, and I became more and more active in the agile community. And in 2012, I was about to go fully independent already, but then something held me back. It was like, I'm not sure, is this now the right thing to do? Isn't it too dangerous? Our first kid was on its way to get born. And I somehow thought, maybe it's not the right thing to do. And then I made the experience, or I became employed by two agile consulting companies. And in the first one, I was 7 weeks until I said, well, it was nice. And if it's nice enough, you have to go. So for a couple of reasons, it wasn't the right thing. And then I went to another agile consulting company in Germany, and it was really a such a great experience because I worked with so many really, really bright and great people. But after half a year, I said, or I felt I had this desire to be on my own, to be able to take my own decisions and to decide everything for me and myself. So then I took the decision and said, well, guys, it was really great. But from now on, I'm on my own.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, it's interesting. It's probably not a coincidence that a lot of Leanpub authors are people who sort of went independent and became consultants themselves. And so just moving on to talk about your book, Agile Games and Simulations. So what's the origin story for the book? I know it had a successful German predecessor.
Right.
You could talk a little bit, just how did that book come about and how did this one come about?
Yeah. That's quite a funny story. It was, I think, in 2008. No, 2018. In 2018, Dennis and I were at lunch at a big conference in Munich in Germany, the OOP. It's a big thing with 2,000 people or something since 35 years, and they do this every year. So we had a talk at the conference, a session, and then we met at lunchtime and sit on the table, took our lunch, and just had a discussion about our customers and what we do there and what we don't like and how we teach them and how we coach them and which methods and tools and practices and stuff we use. And then we came to the topic of there are some playful methods you can use to teach people, to show them some principle, some Agile principle or some Lean principle, by working with some coins or with sticky notes or whatever you can do. So we talked about Agile games and simulations and the things we typically use at our customers. And a colleague of us was all the time silent at the table as well and just listened to our discussion. And after half an hour, he said, Marc and Dennis, if I listen to you, I think you should write a book on Agile games. And that was the trigger. We immediately started a Google document and did a brain dump with our first ideas, the first structures, and this was the Kickstarter, so to say, and the initial trigger. And then it took, I think, more than 1.5 years until this first small book came out. Because it was my first book as a co-author, and maybe you know how it is. Sometimes you don't have the time, you don't have the mood, you have other things to do. There's always an excuse why you couldn't write or why you don't want to write. And sometimes I was in that phase, sometimes Dennis was in that phase, and most often we both in parallel were in that phase. So we continuously had to say, hey, come on, we have to do something here. So this initial enthusiasm that you have with a new project, it's typically, it has a half time of a couple of weeks or something. And so we had good phases and bad phases, and in the end, I was like, after one year and 3 months or something, I was about to say, hey, Dennis, we both don't work at this project, so nothing happened since a couple of months now. I think we should decide to stop this idea because we will never be able to finish it. And this was for Dennis the trigger to say, okay, so if you stop, then I'm going to finish the project and the book. And then I said, of course, well, if you are going to finish this book, then I'm going to finish this book as well. So this was the trigger energy it needed to get everything done. And then, we were finished by mid of 2019. And in, I think, November 2019, our first small book on Agile games was published by a German publisher. And the thing is that back then in 2019, pre-COVID times, nobody wanted to think about playing Agile games in a remote environment. You just don't do it. It's useless. Nobody wants that. Nobody needs that. So we skipped that part totally out of the book. So the book was published in end of 2019. And suddenly, 3 months, and it was a great success, really. It has great sales back then. And suddenly, 3 months later, the sales numbers just declined down to nearly zero, because nothing was so important than to answer the question how to do all those things that we as Agile coaches and Scrum Masters and in our roles, how to do all those things that we do in a remote setting. So that was the major question of interest back then. So we said, okay, now we have to dig deeper into how to transfer and transform all those activities and games and simulations into remote workshops. How can you do that? And so we gathered quite some experience, all of us probably, in doing remote sessions and figuring out how to handle this. What are the hurdles? What are the obstacles that you have, the technical problems that might arise, and the social problems that might arise. Like you have 25 black small pictures because nobody's turning on the camera, and stuff like that. So we made our experiences and then had the idea to publish a bigger version of the book with all these remote answers. And so it came that the publisher said, hey guys, what do you think about a big book in color with online and much more games and much more explanations on facilitation and how to do all this? And we said, yes, of course, we have lots of material. And we started writing the second book, or extending the first book, which then became the extended version.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing all that. I've had a few interviews with people who were whose type of work was heavily affected by the pandemic. Particularly one author or co-author, she worked for a company called HashiCorp, which was remote from the beginning. And they always had these big in-person conferences that were very, very important for their company culture. And then when the pandemic hit, it was all of a sudden, wow, we need to figure out how to do all of this kind of digitally. And then sort of a lot of people whose job was consulting, like in-person consulting and things like that. And in particular, I just the challenge of games and playing these kind of games together remotely was a very just interest. I mean, it's easy for me to say it's interesting when it's not my profession or my livelihood, but it's a fascinating challenge. And just getting into the content of the book a little bit, I think a lot of people listening might be thinking, games, and they might think about some kind of workshop day they had once at their company where someone came in and they played some games. We're talking about actually fun is important, play is important, but fun is also serious and play is also serious. And the kind of games, probably to give us flavor of what the book is about when it comes to games, is more like thinking about war games, for example. There's a thing that people will do where they'll in militaries where they'll take some time out away from the battlefield and away from the weapons and away from that kind of training, and they'll play games. And so the scenarios are set up, you're given a role, and then you're given some sort of constraints, and it's all very serious, but it can be structured. There can be purposes. There are specific things that you're trying to learn or teach people or have them figure out themselves through playing the game. And that's kind of that's to give a flavor of the kind of games we're talking about here. And there's, of course, late to everything, but there's this really interesting Agile games matrix that you've created, which very immediately gives one the sense that, like, okay, these are serious games that we're playing, and we're playing them for serious reasons. And so, for example, if you want to learn about various Agile processes, by gaming them out in advance of doing them, as it were, kind of for real, like that's kind of like, instead of just like reading a book about an Agile process, but like gaming it out in advance. Then when you're in the real like work environment doing it, you're like, oh, you can recall the kind of game that you played. It's kind of like, remember your training.
Right.
And that's one thing I really liked when I was reading about this. And so, for example, like I'm just looking at the matrix here, and sort of like there's sort of like games across the top, there's simulations and activities, and then there's like the matrix shows you what the learning objectives and the debriefings are from each of these games. So if there's like something that you think if you're managing a team and there's something that you think they need to learn, you can actually get this matrix and be like, oh, here's a game that we can play. And then you can go in the book, find the game, and get like the coin flip game, for example. So why don't we just, that's just the first one I saw when I was glancing at it now. Why don't we talk about the coin flip game, just to put you on the spot? So what is the coin flip game, and what's that useful for?
So the coin flip game is a very good example. So let's say, as a person being responsible for a team, in which role level? So maybe as a Scrum Master, as an external Agile coach or whatever. Maybe you observe that the team is always working on too many things in parallel. Like everybody is assigned 10 tasks to work on, and everything is in progress, and people just jump around from one task to the next one, and then they have to wait for answers or something, and they go back to the first one, then to the third task, and so on. So they continuously switch between tasks, and the thing that you can observe is that everybody is busy all the time, but nothing really moves forward. Nothing gets done. So from the outside view, you might have the impression, hey, great, the whole team is working, everybody's busy, great team. And if you watch 2 weeks later, everybody is still busy. It's still a great team, but you don't have any result. There's no outcome. And so this might be an observation. And then you can, if you know what the principles are that you can teach here, and how to change, or how to make the people experience another way of organizing their work. You can say, okay, let's think about reducing the batch size. So the batch of things that people work in parallel. And with the matrix, you can take a look at reducing batch sizes, or the batch size reduction. And then you will find, for example, the coin flip game. So you play this game, and people experience the difference of what impact does it make, how many things I work on in parallel. And if I reduce this number, how fast we can become as a team. Maybe with the work that I do, the task that I do, I have to hand it over to you in the next step, and you have to do some things. And if you are finished with your task, then you have to hand over to someone else in the team. And by reducing the batch sizes that we work on, we can vastly increase the speed of getting things done. So this is really a small, quick exercise you can do with a team, and you just turn around coins, real coins. So everybody has 10 coins on their workspace, and you start with work on those 10 coins in parallel. So turn them around, and then you pass those 10 coins to the next guy next to you as the next working station, and then you take the time, how much that takes, until all the 10 coins, all the 10 tasks are turned around at the end of the whole process chain. And then you switch to, now let's do only 5 coins in parallel. And after 5 coins, you pass those 5 coins to the next working station. And in the next round, we do 2 coins and then 1 coin. So we reduce the number of batch size more and more, and take the timings. And the people realize that, their process speeds up, and they get first results as fast as possible. And if you think back about what I said, my first real Agile experience with getting real customer and user feedback. So what's the difference of doing 10 features and then by the end of the long project, turning them over to the customers for getting feedback, or if you do one thing, get it as fast as possible through your process chain and get one outcome of this one task, of this one thing, and get immediate feedback for this thing. So it just speeds up everything. You get better results, you get faster feedback, and this is a great way to experience for the people in such a simple system, what the beneficial impact is of changing the way of working.
Yeah, I love that example because if I'm understanding it correctly, because we think game, but this really captures it well. Like it's a system or a process that you're actually undergoing. It's radically simplified, but it's a process. And when it's reduced to something where you can something so simple, it's actually easier to see the concept behind it because you're not distracted by the kind of complexity or particularity of the task. You're flipping a coin is a very simple thing to do. Yeah. But so you can start thinking of it just as an abstract task rather than as whatever, coding some feature or something like that. Yeah. And so with that said, so what's the difference between a game and a simulation?
To us, it's our own definition. A game is just a small thing like the coin flip game or the boss worker game. It's it shows one principle mainly to experience one principle or one small practice. And a simulation is like the Scrum Lego City game or the Kanban pizza game, where you simulate a whole framework or a whole bigger process-like way of working. So this is basically the differentiation that we make between games and simulations. And there's one important thing. One of the major concerns you hear when you go to organizations and talk about, let's play an Agile game. There always are people who say, no. We don't play here. This is serious business what we do. We are not in kindergarten. We don't play here. So, but if we do an Agile simulation, it's much more serious by just talking about simulations and not games. So this is a trick.
Yeah, no, there's one thing I noticed about your book. There's quite a bit of very good and hard-won preamble. And one of the points you and Dennis make is that sometimes being judicious with the way you choose to name things or talk about things can actually have a big impact on the success or failure of your project. And so there may be environments where if you just use the word simulation instead of game, you will succeed in convincing people to participate in what is actually going to be very productive for them. And sometimes, for example, you might just not use the word Agile, or you might just not use the word Scrum or something like that. And then you just sort of need to, you as the consultant or facilitator need to adapt to the environment. And it might start, like you say, trick, and that's sort of funny, but it's because it kind of is in a way, but it's not a cynical exercise. It's just it's a way of actually recognizing that different people have different expectations for what sort of words mean or what things imply. They've got their own experience of things in the background. They might have had a really bad experience with someone who was, say, perhaps getting them to do something frivolous and used words like Agile or game or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, that's what they think when they hear that, and that totally makes sense. And yeah, being aware as the facilitator of these kind of, what kind of environment am I going into? What are the expectations going to be? Things like that.
And what are the experiences of the people in that organization?
Yeah.
Like, as you said, there are companies nowadays where you should not mention Agile or Scrum at all, because they tried for 7 or 15 years and nothing went well. And they came to the conclusion that doesn't work in our culture, that doesn't work in our environment or whatever. So don't talk about doing an Agile retrospective. Let's just do a reflection workshop or whatever. Pick another name.
Yeah. On that note, so one of the technical terms that I already brought up is debriefing. What is debriefing in your conceptual?
Debriefing is highly connected to the learning objectives. So maybe let's go back one step further. We don't play for the sake of playing games. And we don't use simulations for the sake of doing a simulation. So you always have to identify a learning objective. There must be a need for the team or for the organization or for the group of people you're working with, that you say, I have some exercise here, some activity, some game, some simulation that really helps them to understand or to experience this concept that I want them to learn. So the debriefing part connects to the learning objectives, because in the debriefing, after playing the game, after doing the simulation, it's our major responsibility to do a good debriefing and to guarantee that the people and the participants made the right experiences and made the right conclusions out of those experiences, so that they can connect what they did, what they experienced, to those learning objectives. And there might be situations when people don't really get it. So they did some activity and it was fun, it was nice, they had a good time, but they don't come to the conclusion that you expected them to have. So then you need more time in the debrief to talk about the underlying principles, to talk about what happened in this exercise, and to ask like coaching questions to the people, to make them open up their minds and think maybe on another level what just happened and how they can relate what they experienced to the real working environment.
Yeah, that's
so that.
It's interesting that there's this one thing about that there's like this structure to this gaming activity that happens, and that part of it is the debriefing and the reflection, but the guided reflection on it afterwards. It's not just like playing a game and there now we're done. Think about it, and but like guided by people who've designed the game for a purpose, and things like that. That's just so fascinating. In the last part.
Although what we have also in the book are it's not only about Agile games and simulations for principles and practices and social things and communication and technical skills, but also to give you some activities for your workshop design, like opening a workshop, opening a training, or doing some energizers and closing the whole thing again. So those are not really Agile games or simulations, but they are playful activities you can do to open up the group, to come to a creative mode. And especially the energizers might be quite silly. And maybe they don't have any learning objective other than getting some fresh energy, getting some air in the brain, and stuff like that. But then it's totally fine to don't debrief an energizer.
Yeah, no, that's it's funny. I keep personally, I just keep coming up with sort of Marshall kind of analogies or comparisons. But like one of the things in in military training that people will do is they'll introduce basically energizers, right? So it's like, what are we doing today? Knife training. Are you ever going to get in a fight with a knife? No. But it's exciting to people, like sort of like, to take a break from what they're doing and do something like sort of like that's, that's kind of like related, but like, just to get your blood flowing, just to get your brain interested, things like that. And when you're doing part of big exercises over a period of time, having this concept of like, this exists. It's related to what we're doing, but it has its own purpose, which is just to sort of perk you up and get you interested and things like that.
Yeah.
It's a very, very subtle kind of thing to introduce to a training process or facilitation. In the last part of the interview, we typically talk about the person's experience writing and self-publishing and things like that. And you've already talked about that a little bit. A very interesting story, actually, about how you kind of like mutually had to pull each other back in to your own project. So I guess I can probably just skip to the end there and ask the last question that I always ask, which is, if there was one feature we could build for you on Leanpub that you'd love for us to build for you, or if there was one thing, and I think I know one thing that just had you shaking your fist at Leanpub, going, "Damn you, Leanpub! Can you please fix this for me?" Is there anything that you can ask that you would ask us to fix or build for you?
At the moment, to be honest, nothing comes to my mind because. Yeah, there were some struggles working with the system because we had some major problems with numbering the figures in the book in a consistent way. So there were some issues there. But besides of that, I think every other small thing was so small that I could find a workaround, and I would say it was a smooth process of creating the modular files and merging everything into each other so that it works. And okay. So meanwhile, I created the printable version. So we had the print book available now. You can order it, not at Leanpub, of course, but so we picked KDP. And it worked quite well. It's great.
And did you use our print-ready PDF output file?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So for anyone listening, Leanpub is ebooks, but we of course help facilitate the production of print books, and that's through if you use one of our writing modes, then writing in Markua and then plain text and things like that, then you can actually just click a button. You do configure some settings, but basically you click a button and you can get the PDF that you need to go to sort of Ingram or KDP or what have you to kind of upload it, and then they can use that file to turn it into a print book for sale, which is just a really great and interesting thing.
There's one thing now that I can recall. So I had the maybe it's a feature request for a really developing pro user kind of. So I had the tendency to say, "Hey guys, come on, give me access to your source code, and I quickly fix this bug." So maybe this is, I don't know. You can think about it.
Thanks very much for that. I mean,
if you have some authors who are able to code,
we definitely do. It's one of the great things about, the fact that Leanpub has attracted so many authors of programming books and stuff like that is that.
Yeah,
they often want to help, and they have great. And it's sort of funny. Like there's always a back and forth with that. Like, can I just fix your damn bug, Leanpub? But often what people will do is like, and they'll cheerfully go off and create the whole new kind of product of their own, like a reviewing product or something like that. And then we'll find out about what they've done. We'll be like, oh, hold on, we know about it. And then we design a feature based on that. So basically almost everything in Leanpub at this point was at some point like kind of pulled out of us by probably a programmer author who went and sort of was like, I've tried to build something like this myself. And we find out and we're like, we could, given our knowledge and the fact that we've got the platform, we can actually build a better version of that ourselves. But yes, so it's very unlikely that we're going to be letting arbitrary people mess with our code anytime soon. But we definitely, absolutely love feedback. And when people are like, there's a bug here, like, or something like that, like the feedback is amazing. And yeah, that's like really great. So, and so thanks very much for that. And yeah, we're probably not going to be releasing or open sourcing anything anytime soon, but we understand the desire for it, and we really, really appreciate feedback, particularly on our authors forum, but directly to hello@leanpub.com as well is really, really good. Well, Marc, thank you very much for taking some time out of your evening to talk to me here. And thank you very much to you and Dennis for using Leanpub as a platform for your really great book.
Thank you for providing everything.